Good morning, y'all. Thank you for tapping in for some real talk from the heart this morning. Daily devotions through the Bible, and this morning's real talk is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, and we're going to focus on verses 9 through 14. Let me read this to you, and we'll get into our real talk. It says, "Also he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." This morning, the Lord led me to this passage, came back to it in my morning reading, and the thought of the self-deception of religious pride was just sticking with me, and began to journal and jot some things down that was coming to my heart about this issue of self-deception in religious pride. And the first thing I want you to see here is it says that he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous. And so the first thing I want you to see here is that religious pride leads to trusting in self-righteousness, right? You become self-deceived because of your religious pride, and you begin trusting that you are right, man. You're trusting in your own self-righteousness. The second thing I want you to see here is what the self-deception of religious pride causes is found in verses 9 and 11. Because look at the end of verse 9. It says, and despises others. Right? And despises. The word despises means to see as insignificant or to lessen the value of, non-important. And so that's what the self-deception of religious pride brings into a person's heart, that they begin to despise others. But not only that, it says the Pharisee stood and prayed with himself and says, I thank you that I am not like other men. And then he basically begins to describe sinners, right? And so, listen, religious pride causes a person to think that they are better than other sinners. Religious pride examines others, but religious pride doesn't examine self. This guy's not examining himself before the Lord, right? In his religious pride, he's looking around at other sinners, right? And basically putting them in a bad light before God. Now, the second thing I want you to see, or the third thing I should say, is found in verse 14. It says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, right? The humble man. He went down to his house justified, but the self-righteous, right? The religious, proud man, this is rather than the other, man. So I want you to see that, man, is that religious pride deceives a person into living under the mistaken presumption that they are right before the Lord. Now, when you get to verse 12, right, you see another thing here. I want to back up just a little bit. When you get to verse 12, you see the self-deception of religious pride focuses on and boasts in what it does rather than what Jesus Christ did. Self-deception, self-righteousness exalts self, right? Religious pride, it exalts self. It exalts its church. It exalts its pastor. It exalts its denomination. That's what religious pride does. And there's a self-deception in that. They're thinking that they're saved because of the church they attend or whatever, the movement they're a part of or the organization they're a part of. And you got to be careful of that. You got to be careful of that. The salvation is found in Christ alone, right? And so let's continue to look on here. And so you see in this verse here that religious pride deceives a person into living under the mistaken presumption that they are right with God. I'm going to say this again. I want you to understand this, man. That religious pride, right, that self-deception that comes from that religious pride, it causes a person to live under a mistaken presumption that they are right with God. This religious man that's there, right, he's looking up, beating, like, man, I'm the man, I'm doing good. And he thought he was right with God. But Jesus said that it was the humble man that went home justified, right with God, and not this other man. And so verses 13 and 14, I want you to see here, is that for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The Bible is very clear that God resists the proud. God resists the proud. Listen, including the religious proud. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And so what we got to do is do just like this man did here in verse 13. A simple, right, prayer, but it's what we need to do, man, is we need to own our sin before God, and we just plead for mercy. God, please don't give me what I deserve. Please don't give me what I deserve. I'm not going to fall back on what I do or don't do. All I can do is just throw myself on your mercy, God. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. But a person who is self-deceived in religious pride won't do that. They won't do that. 1 Corinthians 3:18 says, if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he is self-deceived. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he is self-deceived. That's 1 Corinthians 3:18. Another passage that came to my mind this morning was Galatians 6:7. It says, do not be self-deceived. Do not be self-deceived. God is not mocked. God will not be mocked by self-righteousness. Right? God will not be mocked by religious pride. He will not be mocked. And so self-deception, man, you got to watch out for it. I remember hearing a quote a while back that said the worst form of deception is self-deception. You know, you can kind of see it coming, right? When people are trying to deceive you, and you can see it, right? You discern it. But when you can convince yourself, when you can deceive yourself of something, and you begin to live under a false presumption, a mistaken presumption, man, that's when it gets dangerous, y'all. And there are a lot of people in this world who are living under that mistaken presumption. How do we know? Because Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, he said, many, not a few, he said, many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, Lord. And of course, you know the rest of the story, right? He says, I never knew you. I never knew you. Depart from me, you who have a lifestyle, you who practice, right, wickedness. And that's the deception there, man. People say, I go to church, so I must be right with God. But then the rest of the week, they are practicing, they are living a lifestyle of sin. And that is self-deception, y'all. Let us examine ourselves today. Let us examine ourselves today, and let us be sure that our humble hope is in the finished work of the gospel and not in anything else, lest we become self-deceived, right, with religious pride. Hey, listen, the Lord loves you. I love you too. Praying for you. Please be praying for me as well. Hope you have a great Wednesday. Hope you have a wonderful Wednesday. And listen, if you live in the area, I'll be teaching Ecclesiastes chapter 2 tonight at 7 o'clock. I'll be live here on Facebook. But if you live in the area, come through Calvary Chapel, Toppenish, 408 West 6th Avenue. Man, I would love to see you in our midweek study tonight. We have youth group Bible study, and we also have kids church as well. So, man, come through. Love to have you. All right, God bless y'all, man. Talk to you guys again tomorrow morning.